Hello, this is again Dr. Jonathan Bentovish. I'm recording a special video for this God's Physics new book that came out by iUniversity.com. And this special video is entitled An Urgent Call for Cosmologists and Astronomers to carry out an empirical validation, a time-sensitive empirical validation of the critical prediction of this new paradigm, God's physics paradigm for 21st century theoretical physics. Recently, there was a publication of a special issue, a second special issue published by an international scientific journal dedicated to this new God's physics paradigm of 21st century physics, and it contains 17 articles, peer-reviewed scientific articles. Several of them are dedicated to this time-sensitive, urgent call for cosmologists and astronomers to validate one of the critical predictions of this new God's physics paradigm. I call one of them, or I termed one of them, the new 21st century solar eclipse. And so let me explain what it is, and let me, in a sense, communicate in this presentation, as well as in all of the 50 plus scientific peer-reviewed articles, keynote opening lectures that I deliver in multiple international physics conferences, in this God's Physics book, in other platforms. I'm going to call now for astronomers and cosmologists to carry out an extremely important validation of God's physics critical prediction, which differentiates it from the old paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. That old paradigm I call the material causal paradigm. And so let me explain briefly to the general public, as well as astronomers and cosmologists, why this call is so urgent, why it's so important, and what exciting time we are passing through right now. We stand at a historical point that is equivalent to what happened 100 years ago, when Einstein's then new paradigm of relativity theory, general relativity theory, in 1919, Eddington, a famous British astronomer, set to validate also such a validation of a critical prediction of then Einstein's new general relativity theory. And that critical prediction was, since Einstein's relativity theory denotes that massive objects curve space and time, he had a critical prediction about the perihelion pathway of Mercury's pathway around the sun, and the value of that, of Mercury's perihelion's traveling pathway around the sun, the value of that curved pathway was double the value predicted by Einstein relative to the value predicted by Newtonian Classical Mechanics. Einstein's predicted 1.8, Newtonian Mechanics predicted 0.8 arc. And when Eddington clearly saw that carrying out this critical prediction of general relativity theory back then, at the turn of 20th century physics, that was the new paradigm relative to Newtonian mechanics. When Eddington realized that testing and validating empirically or experimentally measuring whether in fact Mercury's perihelions value, pathway curvature value around the sun would be, as Einstein's general relativity theory predicted, 1.6, as opposed to Newtonian mechanics prediction, which is 0.8, he set boldly to carry out this astronomical observation. And lo and behold, Einstein's general relativity theory prediction came out to be the valid one of 1.6. And as we all know, pretty much overnight, Einstein's general relativity theory was accepted as the new valid theory or paradigm, the new paradigm for 20th century physics. We now stand at an equivalent point, almost precisely. Thomas Kuhn, the famous philosopher of science, teaches us, and this has been accepted across the board as an accurate description of the manner in which science or any scientific discipline evolves over time. So Thomas Kuhn, the philosopher of science, teaches us. He wrote an influential, a groundbreaking work in 1962 on the structure of scientific revolutions, and in this book Thomas Kuhn described the fact that science, taken any given discipline, scientific discipline, evolves through phases. There is a phase of what he called standard science, in which scientific thought or inquiry in a specific discipline evolves based on a certain scientific paradigm. That scientific paradigm holds true for a while. And for example, such as Newtonian mechanics, it held true for a while. It was very useful. And so scientists and physicists carrying out experiments for a while according to this Newtonian mechanics old paradigm were very successful. But then Thomas Kuhn teaches us there comes a point in time or along the evolution of science in which that standard paradigm, in this case the older Newtonian mechanics, classical mechanics, doesn't suffice any longer. It's too limited, it's too constrained. And at that point in time, there needs to be, and what that means, what that entails is that the old paradigm, the standard paradigm, such as Newtonian mechanics, classical mechanics, starts exhibiting certain alarming signs. Those alarming signs include theoretical inconsistencies. For example, Newtonian mechanics had a contradiction between or the old paradigm of 19th century physics of Newtonian mechanics became inconsistent with Maxwell's electromagnetic wave theory, and so that's one alarming sign. The other alarming sign is that the old paradigm cannot explain certain major phenomena, such as in the case of Newtonian mechanics. Newtonian mechanics was based on the assumption that there exists a very fine element called the ether, and that ether element was assumed to perfuse or fill up the whole universe. And yet when experimental physicists tried for a long time during 19th century investigation or physics, they tried to validate the existence of this ether, this hypothetical elusive ether element, and they were not able to find the ether element. So that situation in which the standard paradigm has theoretical inconsistencies, and moreover it has certain major phenomena that it cannot account for, such as the ether element, which was key in Newtonian mechanics. These are the alarming signs that Thomas Kuhn is speaking about, and he says at that time we know that science has to undergo what he calls a paradigmatic shift from the old paradigm, in that case Newtonian mechanics, classical mechanics, to the new paradigm. Historically that meant relativity theory or general relativity theory. And so when science reaches such a point of a paradigmatic crisis and therefore a paradigmatic shift towards the new paradigm, what we see is that, as in the case of Einstein's verification or validation of a critical prediction, we need at that point to identify a critical prediction that differentiates the newer paradigm than the older paradigm. In the case of Einstein, that was the Mercury's Perihelion's double-valued curvature value relative to Newtonian mechanics value or predicted value for Mercury's Perihelion pathway. And we stand now at an equivalent point, precisely equivalent point, because at this point in time, the old paradigm of what I call material causal paradigm, which underlies both relativity and theory and quantum mechanics, also exhibits those alarming signs. There is a theoretical inconsistency, basic theoretical inconsistency between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, associated among other with quantum entanglement as opposed to the speed of light barrier for the transmission of any information. This is very well known. So there is a theoretical inconsistency between relativity theory and quantum mechanics. Moreover, a major phenomena such as the accelerated expansion of the universe, which the only way that the old paradigm, material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics, the only way that it can account for this accelerated rate of expansion of the universe is by assuming a purely hypothetical dark matter, dark energy concepts. And those dark matter, dark energy concepts, again, like the ether concept, which was purely hypothetical and could not be detected, lo and behold, now for 2 decades, the scientific community has been trying relentlessly to validate and detect directly the presence of dark matter, dark energy, which comprises up to 95% of all the mass and energy in the universe. And yet, scientists were not able now for 2 decades to identify and detect this dark matter, dark energy, completely hypothetical concepts. And so, first of all, what I've done in over, again, 50 to 60 peer-reviewed scientific articles, one of the articles was entitled, "Could Dark Matter, Dark Energy Be Superfluous?" i.e. non-existent, such exactly as Einstein discarded the existence of the ether element, which could not be detected. I did the same thing, and I declared that dark matter, dark energy are in fact superfluous because they cannot be found. And I suggested a new model, the God's physics or computational unified field theory model, which can resolve the inconsistency between the relativity theory and quantum mechanics, and also offers an alternative explanation for the accelerated rate of the universe's expansion. And this is exactly related to my the urgent call that I'm making for cosmologists and astronomers to make this measurement, this validation of God's physics or computational unified field theories a new critical prediction, which is equivalent to Einstein's call for astronomers, cosmologists, to test Mercury's perihelion value. So the new critical prediction that should be tested, I called it also the new solar eclipse, because that measurement would actually decide or has the potential of validating God's physics new paradigm for 21st century as more valid than relativity theory and quantum mechanics, which become special cases in this broader new understanding. So what is this God's physics new critical prediction? I will state it as I did in all these articles that were published, and then I will explain it briefly, and then I want to explain what theoretical ramifications and what significance, great significance, this has for science and for physics in the 21st century. So the idea is this. According to the major discovery made by God's physics new paradigm is that the way to resolve the apparent theoretical inconsistency between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, and to gain a completely new, exciting, far-reaching understanding of the universe is through the discovery of a singular, higher-ordered universal computational or consciousness principle. And that higher-ordered universal consciousness or computational principle is essentially a computational or consciousness principle, universal computational / consciousness principle, which computes simultaneously every exhaustive spatial pixel in the universe simultaneously, and creates an extremely rapid series of universal frames. So each universal frame, which is computed at the incredible, unfathomable rate of c squared divided by Planck's constant, which gives us 1.36 in the power of minus 50 per second, many trillions of times per second. So at each trillionth of a second, etc., this UCP, Universal Computational Principle, Consciousness Principle, computes simultaneously all the pixels in the universe as one universal frame. And between one universal frame and the other, the whole universe dissolves back into this UCP. So we're seeing here a new conception of the universe, where the universe is actually being created, dissolved, recreated, and evolved through a series of universal frames. Each frame is computed simultaneously, and between each frame and the subsequent frame, the whole universe dissolves back into this UCP. The discovery of this higher ordered singular UCP makes a profound change in science. I'll talk about it in a second. But one of the ideas is that there cannot be any cause and effect, because all the points in a given universal frame are computed simultaneously, so there cannot be any cause and effect between any two or more exhaustive spatial pixels in any single or multiple universal frames. And there cannot be any cause and effect relationship between any exhaustive spatial pixel existing in one frame and a subsequent or subsequent frames. So this undermines the basic assumption of the Big Bang model, of the collapse of the probability wave function, of dark matter, dark energy, beyond the fact that they're completely hypothetical and cannot be detected. Even theoretically, they're negated, because even if there existed dark matter, dark energy, they could not interact with galaxies at any single or multiple universal frames to actually propel the universe and expand it. So what's the alternative explanation? And we're getting to this critical new God's physics prediction. Excuse me. What's the alternative explanation, and how does it relate to God's physics new critical prediction? There is a postulate in a new God's physics or computational unified field theory, new paradigm for 21st century physics. There is a new postulate which I call the Collective Human Consciousness Focus. And that Collective Human Consciousness Focus theoretical postulate essentially says that whenever you have a large group of human beings collectively focusing on this UCP, Universal Consciousness or Computational Principle, that brings about a non-continuous increase or leap in the rate of the universe's accelerated expansion. To begin with, the explanation of the universe's accelerated expansion is not because of any dark matter or dark energy, which we said are superfluous and could not even exist theoretically. The reason for the universe's accelerated expansion is that the UCP, which creates, dissolves, recreates, and evolves every spatial pixel, exhaustive spatial pixel in the universe, at this incredible rate of many trillions of times per second. So the accelerated expansion of the universe is the result of the fact that the UCP, each time that it creates the subsequent frame after it's dissolved the preceding frame of the universe, each time it creates a new frame of the universe, it adds a certain amount of pixels to the new frame, and it consistently adds a certain number of pixels, so that usually we see the rate of the universe's expansion, the rate of the universe's expansion is being accelerated, but it's being accelerated by the addition of a certain number of exhaustive spatial pixels by this UCP. Now, at certain points in time, this is now getting to the critical prediction of God's physics, at certain points in time, such as when you have a collective human consciousness focus of millions or billions of human beings focusing on this universal consciousness principle, UCP, at that time, this brings about the UCP's dramatic increase or non-continuous leap or increase in the rate of the universe's expansion. And so I gave the example of the Jewish Rosh Hashanah, New Year, 2 days time interval. This year, it's coming up very soon at September 7th and 8th, 2021. So the critical prediction is that if and when astronomers, cosmologists would test the rate of the universe's expansion before September 7th and 8th, 2021, during and after, or comparison between the rate of the universe's accelerated expansion rate up to Rosh Hashanah this year, 7th and 8th, so before 7th and 8th of September, and compare that to the new rate, the increase, the non-continuous leap or increase in the rate of the universe's expansion, which begins in the Jewish Rosh Hashanah, so 7th, 8th, and onwards for the next Jewish year. The prediction is that the new rate of expansion of the universe, accelerate of the universe's expansion, would be non-continuous. There would be a significant non-continuous leap or increase relative to the previous year. And this is what essentially I've been calling, and I am calling, astronomers and cosmologists to test. Please test and measure the universe's accelerated expansion before 7th and 8th of September, and from the 7th, 8th of September and onwards, and compare that. And the prediction of God's physics new paradigm for 21st century is that you will see a non-continuous increase during the 7th, 8th, a new rate which is higher and non-continuous relative to the older rate, and the same way and beyond 7th-8th of September, that new rate of accelerated expansion of the universe would carry on. And the idea is that when astronomers, cosmologists carry out this critical prediction of God's physics, if it's in fact found that that's the new rate of accelerated expansion, then this would mean that the new God's physics paradigm is much more valid than the older paradigm, and the same way that Eddington's verification of Einstein's God's physics paradigm, of Einstein's general relativity theory paradigm, was proved to be more valid than the older Newtonian mechanics. And by the way, of course, as I've written, due to the fact that the older material causal paradigm cannot explain this non-continuous increase in the universe's accelerated expansion rate, because again, dark matter, dark energy is a hypothetical concept, and they would teach, or they would predict a continuous accelerated rate of expansion, no leaps and changes, no non-continuous changes in the rate of the universe's expansion, and for sure not related to collective human consciousness, such as in the Jewish Rosh Hashanah New Year 2 days a time interval. So we stand at a historic point, and it's extremely important for astronomers, cosmologists to carry out this critical prediction, because this critical prediction would allow science to decide and in fact validate the new God's physics paradigm as more valid than the older paradigm. This is perhaps a good point just to mention a small anecdote or a description of Einstein and where he thought science was going. I called this God's physics new paradigm initially as the computational unified field theory, because I regarded Einstein's quest for a unifying field theory as quite visionary. He preceded his time, no doubt. And even though physicists at that time, some of them criticized Einstein and thought he was going down a blind alley, and Einstein himself was not able to complete his quest for a unifying field theory, I still thought and still believe that his quest was visionary. He preceded his time, and so I called my theory computational unified field theory, and now God's physics. So when Einstein was asked 100 years ago or more, when he was asked, what do you think would be the fate of your relativity theory in 100 years? Would it hold forever true? And he was very humble, a true scientist, and he said, no, I do not believe that that relativity theory would hold as the valid theory forever. He said, I just hope and believe that relativity theory will become a special case within a broader generalization, and this is precisely what's happening with God's physics paradigm. God's physics paradigm, it even appears at the bottom of this a beautiful God's physics iUniverse cover. At the bottom there is a universal computational formula, and at the center of this new God's physics paradigm there is a universal computational formula which integrates for the first time space, time, energy, and mass. This has not been accomplished by relativity theory, and it also in a sense includes relativity theory and quantum mechanics as special cases within this new God's physics or universal computational field theory as a special case. And so now let me just spend a few minutes to explain what are the profound theoretical ramifications of this God's physics new paradigm, and why it's so important, this call for cosmologists and astronomers to run and use this precious time, make their measurements of the universe's accelerated expansion rate at this time before September 7th and 8th, and from September 7th and 8th and onwards, and see if in fact there is a leap, there is a non-continuous increase in the universe's rate of expansion, which would obviously validate God's physics as the new valid paradigm for 21st century physics. So in a nutshell, and again I encourage people to read God's physics paradigm, God's physics book, to read the 50 plus articles, special issues, scientists to communicate with me, and this is perhaps a good point. Also, it's been published. My personal email is Dr. Bentovish, DRBENTWICH at gmail.com, and I encourage cosmologists, astronomers to rush and communicate with me about their carrying out of this critical prediction that would advance, no doubt, science's knowledge and understanding of the universe, and open for science and for humanity a new, complete new, exciting scope with this new God's physics paradigm. In a nutshell, the old material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics was based on a material causal assumption, assuming that the world and the universe operates by cause and effect. The Big Bang model, for example, assumes that a nuclear event caused or created suns, galaxies, space, time, energy, and mass. Einstein's equations assume that the evolution of the universe is based on direct interactions between massive objects and their curvature of space-time, and space-time's curved fabric then causes or determines the traveling pathways of these massive and other less massive objects. This is cause and effect. In quantum mechanics, the basic assumption is that in order to measure any subatomical target particle or element, you need to create a direct interaction with a corresponding subatomic probe element, and the assumption is that by this direct interaction, the target's assumed probability wave function collapses into a singular complementary space, energy, time, mass value of the target element. That's again cause and effect. But lo and behold, if the new God's physics paradigm is correct, I call it the acausal computational paradigm, the new paradigm. This acausal computation paradigm essentially says that there cannot be any cause and effect existing between any two or more exhaustive spatial pixels, relativistic, quantum, subatomical, existing in the same frame or in different frames, because all the exhaustive spatial pixels in the universe are computed simultaneously by the UCP. So this new acausal computation paradigm essentially negates, challenges, alters completely our perception and conception of the universe. It was not created by a Big Bang. It could not have been created by a Big Bang, because even if there was a Big Bang event, it could not interact, it could not create any suns, galaxies, etc. And I gave the metaphor, I'm going to use it again briefly. I gave a metaphor of the film. In a film, if you would see, let's say, a glass a cup and a hammer, we'll use the cell phone as a hammer, and the hammer is hitting the glass cup and shattering the glass cup, and the water is spilled on the table. If we see it innocently, common sense wise, we would say that the hammer has caused the breakage of the cup and the spillage of the water. But if we take the film frame by frame, we see that in the first frame they appeared simultaneously, then the second frame, third frame, even when they touch each other, still they're presented simultaneously. So because the fact that they're presented simultaneously, there cannot be any cause and effect. What we can say though, and that's the new acausal computational paradigm, is that the director of the film sets a certain series of frames in which it appears that they are getting closer and closer, and it appears that the hammer has caused the breakage of the cup. And so the new acausal computational paradigm is pointing physics and science to look upwards, in a sense, to say, okay, we cannot say there's any cause and effect on the material causal plane. What exists really is the UCP's creation of a series of universal frames that give us the impression that there's a certain evolution. That holds true, by the way. It negates Darwin's natural selection principle as well, because that's also a material causal assumption that certain interactions between a certain organism and an environment caused the survival of the fittest and the extinction of those organisms that were not as compatible to the environment. That's cause and effect. It cannot exist any longer. So what do we have? We have a new exciting conception of the universe. At the center of this God's physics, a new revelation or a new discovery is the UCP, this singular higher ordered universal computational / consciousness principle, which creates the universe and evolves it at an extremely rapid rate. And therefore, first of all, at the center of God's physics new paradigm, there is the universal computational formula, which integrates completely for the first time in physics space, energy, time, and mass. integrates the four forces of nature, integrates relativity theory and quantum mechanics, and truly points at the centrality of this universal computational or consciousness principle, UCP, which is this is the sole reality. The UCP exists both in between the frames and also solely computes the physical universe during the frames, and therefore one of the theoretical postulates of this new God's physics paradigm, I call it the acausal computational principle, the computational invariance principle, which essentially says that since only the UCP exists both in between the frames and solely computes each exhaustive spatial pixels for physical features of space-time, energy and mass simultaneously, therefore the only thing that is really constant, consistent, and real, if you will, is this UCP. And we start looking at the UCP, this universal computational consciousness principle. We start looking at this universal computational formula. Recently, in the new special issue, there's been another major discovery in God's physics paradigm, which discovered that there is 10 hierarchical computational dimensions associated with this universal computational formula. In other words, that the UCP creates the universe through 10 computational hierarchical dimensions. And by the way, obviously I cannot elaborate on this whole significant theory and elaborate theory in this presentation, but I can say that it's also the first time in physics that human consciousness, human choice, the moral principle becomes a key element, and also the evolution of the universe, physical, biological, the whole evolution of the universe is guided and planned, so to speak, by this UCP, from inanimate to animate plants, animals, human beings, and to the perfected Geula state, which is a morally perfected and spiritually perfected and even physically perfected state of humanity and the world. And in a sense, the UCP pre-planned and is driving the universe through this evolution that the UCP is conducting from inanimate matter to animate plants, animals, human beings, and towards that Geula. Geula is a term taken from Jewish thought and philosophy and understanding, denoting the perfected state, the perfected ultimate state of the world. And so the whole universe is being guided and being evolved by the UCP towards that perfected state. We stand at an exciting time because science's my call for cosmologists, astronomers, to test this critical prediction of God's physics and rush and do that before the new Rosh Hashanah of 7th and 8th of September. This is extremely important. Once this is validated, we start entering a new era in science and humanity in general, because it would impact very much the way that we as human beings look at the world, look at ourselves. Our moral choices, when a human being makes a moral or immoral choice for the first time, God's physics new paradigm, this would instigate, this would create the UCP's selection of one of multiple possible futures for that individual human being, in which that individual human being will have to experience the good or bad action and consequences of their choice. Again, not as a punishment, but by the way, but as a means for this UCP to lead humanity towards that perfected state. And we live in an exciting time because science's validation of God's physics new paradigm would essentially focus and bring a new knowledge to science and to humanity, that truly there is only one singular reality, that is the universal consciousness reality or principle, and that the universe is a manifestation of this universal consciousness reality. We as human beings possess an extremely important role in this evolution towards the perfected Geula state, and in fact we stand at a historic point, where science's validation of God's physics paradigm through this critical prediction of one of two critical predictions of Jewish Rosh Hashanah Collective Human Consciousness Focus, non-continuous expansion, accelerated rate of expansion of the universe. When that's validated, we are beginning an era in which science actually is entering into this Geula state, because the Geula state of science and humanity is characterized by an understanding that there is only this one singular reality, that singular reality is moral. It cares about human beings and their choices. It cares about all beings, and it's evolving the universe towards that perfected state. So this is a very exciting time. I encourage people both to read God's Physics, a new book by iUniverse.com. My personal email is drbentovic, DRBENTWICH @gmail.com. I encourage astronomers, cosmologists to communicate with me expediently now in order to carry out this critical prediction of God's physics about the non-continuous accelerated rate of the universe's expansion during Jewish Rosh Hashanah, which in this year is September 7th and 8th of 2021. And it's an exciting time, so I'm glad to share this new revolution and the call for astronomers and cosmologists to validate this new paradigm for 21st century physics. Thank you very much.